Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am here with the one and only Esha from Historically. Esha, hi, how are you today, this weekend?
I'm doing excellent. Nothing to complain about.
Um, why don't you tell our listeners who may not be as familiar with you? I followed you for years because I've read Historically and all of your threads, but kind of what you kind of do at Historically, how it got started, and how you ended up in St. Petersburg.
Okay, so how historically started was I was working for an election campaign for a candidate in South Carolina named Mal Hyman. And so this was when Trump was talking about shithole countries. And most Democrats were like, well, El Salvador is not a bleep hole country, or Haiti is not. But then what Mal did is that he showed righteous anger, where he's like, of course these countries are bleep hole countries. That's because the U.S. went and invaded it and destroyed everything and killed, did all the destruction. And the really interesting part is when he did that on stage, the next day we actually got a couple of Trumpers to come and join his campaign because they understood the truth about history. And I was like, wow, that's really powerful. So after the campaign was, of course, sabotaged by the Democratic Party because he was very staunch against Israel, and there was a lot of spending, and you know what happened. And of course, he was Jewish, so they couldn't really weaponize anti-Semitism against him. Anyways, but then I realized, wait, if I start uncovering the deep history, I think we can get more people on our side to the left, more people who want peace and not war, and so on. And that's how I started it. And when I started it, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna check the narratives, and I'll always tell the truth. And I've done that, and basically knowing the truth has moved me farther and farther and farther to the left, because you kind of realize how evil the powerful can be, and how it's like always an eternal fight between, like, always the metaphorical David and Goliath. And so that's kind of how it happened. And for me, I spent a lot of time in India, and I've seen the poverty, the extreme discrimination, the inhumanity of the caste system. And what I realized was that when I was studying the Soviet Union, I realized that it was like worse than India, more poor. But then after they had the revolution, they just sped up and leaped forward, and became like people's memory did not understand where they started at. So, and there's also like a billions of dollars of propaganda against it. And and the thing is that people there are many people in the US who want change, but they don't know how to get it. So I wanted to show them what exactly the steps are and show more of a people's history of the Soviet Union. So that's how I decided to write my book. Please support me at historically.net. Please become a paid subscriber, historicly.net. Um, and so that's how I started on this journey. And I've also been able to make it to the war zone and cover the true story of the Ukraine-Russia military operations, where the U.S. gives you, like, the U.S. media just kind of, I don't know, like it's like a funhouse mirror, basically. And so that's basically my story.
So you mentioned like atrocity fabrication. That's what we're going to talk about. And I love that you started historically to add context to what's going on today, because we've kind of tried to do that. We've tried to use historical analysis to kind of support the idea of multipolarity. And you brought up such a good point that most people say as you get older, you're going to you go towards the right, you become more conservative. And most of the people in America are saying the opposite, because as they get older and they read, they go more to the left. And I think that what that's doing is creating a sort of class consciousness. And I want to say that I'm hopeful that we're getting to a point where more people understand class consciousness and what we're kind of up against. I'm just, it's so good to see someone else kind of fighting that sort of fight, because the sort of uphill battles that we run into because of previous atrocity fabrication, is like a whole thing that we need to unravel. Like, we're not even debunking the propaganda from today. We need to show them why the propaganda of yesterday was also debunked, and then go forward. Like,
exactly. And because of the propaganda from yesterday, people don't understand the context of anything.
right. So there? Yeah, I thought you had frozen. I'm sorry. So right, we're going to talk about this really big Hamas rape. Am I allowed to say that word? Rape hoax? We'll just use it. We'll just say Hamas hoax from here on out, so I'm not constantly repeating that word. So the New York Times Hamas hoax with this sort of fake journalist, and we had a really great content from Z Squirrel who drove that home, and then you took it a step further. So why don't we kind of go through what happened with this particular Hamas hoax, and then we'll talk about prior atrocity fabrications in your favorite, the grand old Yugoslavia. So let's talk about the Hamas one first.
Okay, so basically, what we know from October 7th is that there was some kind of rave or a concert in this area that's a little north of Gaza. And so there were militants from Gaza who went and started the attack. But then what happened, what we now know, but which we didn't know back then, is that then the Israeli army started deploying helicopters and kind of going full on assault where they didn't really distinguish. So at first the figures were like there were like, they said 1,400, but then they revised it down to 800, and then they realized that but then there were, within the body count, there were a lot of people fighters from Gaza over there too. So it was all mixed up. And then what happened was that during this time, many religious Jews have specific rules on how quickly one must do funeral rituals and how to do it and so on. So in Israel, there is a charity called Zakah that originally started to kind of do these rituals in conflict areas. But then what happened is that they became like an NGO that needs to fundraise. So for them, the more atrocities there are, the more funding they get to do their job. Like ideally an NGO needs to put itself out of business because the problem they tried to solve no longer exists.
Right.
But that's not what happens with most modern NGOs. They kind of put bandages on problems because they need to continue their fundraising cycle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, tell her, what is Zakah exactly? Because this has been a scandal in its own, this whole kind of Zakah thread that's been pulled.
Okay, Zakah is an NGO that sometimes goes to difficult areas to give ambulance services or like help with Jewish funeral rituals they're very specific, very strict rules. And for Orthodox people, it's taken very seriously on what they can do. So that's how they started. But then the owner, the CEO or the head of Zakah started to need to fundraise. And so for him, he then started to make up atrocity propaganda so that the need for Zakah exists more and more. And so on October 7th, like the head, I forgot his name, he made up this propaganda about the 40 beheaded babies, which totally did not happen. No, neither side, it just didn't happen. But then people like Jake Tapper just interviewed him and just blindly aired that story without verifying, even with the Israeli government who say that it did not happen. So that's, and also with the story we're going to talk about with Anat Schwartz, one of the witnesses was a Zakah volunteer or employee. And like I said, there's also other scandals that tie them to the Israeli government, and there are some other less than savory scandals with the head. I just don't know off the top of my head right now, so I can't exactly mention what it is. But just a quick Google search will explain all that.
So back into October 7th, we have the 40 beheaded babies hoax that went on, and then we're back into that now, October 7th.
Yeah.
So Zaka is kind of we figure out that there's not 1400, and then it got down to 800, and then we were in the 200s, and it kind of fluctuated around 200 to 600 for the casualties on October 7th. And do you think that's what, well, as you said, they have to continuously manufacture stories in order to manufacture money. I think they've pulled in like over $1 billion since this whole thing started. So how did the rape hoax begin? Like, how did it snowball into then what it became?
Okay. Basically, there were many bodies. Many were charred. And during that time, many people were fleeing. Some were in cars. It was very disorganized. The police didn't really try to collect any evidence. And during that time, the first thing that happened was that there was a photographer who was near the event. And so there was a picture, like there was a woman who was lying on the floor, on the ground, and it looked like her skirt had been rolled back, but she was completely charred. And what most people don't realize is that the way you find the body after like a few hours is not like if you like how you die is not frozen in time. The body undergoes changes, and like there are muscle twitches, and then before it sets rigor, and lots of things happen. That's why you need forensic scientists, and you can't just like look at the last minute to see what happened. So then she took a picture and put it on Instagram and assumed the woman had been violated. And this is something that the family denies. The family says, no, she was not. There is no evidence. And the police admit that they did not collect any evidence. And with a lot of these rape allegations, if you don't collect evidence within a certain amount of time, it's too late. So none of that was happening. And this is where this I don't want to call her a reporter, this filmmaker named Anat Schwartz comes in. So New York Times has this Pulitzer Prize winner. Well, if you look at original Joseph Pulitzer and his remember the USS Maine, he was called a yellow journalist.
Yeah.
He's Jeffrey Gettleman is a perfect Pulitzer Prize winner.
So now we're encouraging the people we don't like to get Pulitzer Prizes, just as yellow journalists.
Yeah, that's how Joseph Pulitzer started with the you remember the Maine. He started.
Remember the Maine. Yeah.
Yeah. That was also a complete lie.
Yes, another one. We don't have time for that one, though. We don't have time for all of the atrocity fabrication.
All the war. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, for a long time, he kind of spent his entire career doing kind of soft colonial racism. So he wrote a book about his time in Africa, and people like really, if you look at African newspapers, they really, really made fun of him. And he also has a very spotty record with truth. Once he was caught like confusing this Kenyan satire site and saying Robert Mugabe, the former the president of Zimbabwe, said something. And he later said, oh, I was misled by a Zimbabwean journalist. But it was not. It literally came from, like, he confused the Kenyan version of The Onion and reported a fake quote from Mugabe, which was published in New York Times, just to understand his quality of journalism. And then the New York Times just like kept on promoting him for some odd reason.
So how did this woman go from?
Hold on.
I'm
getting to it. Okay. So then Jeffrey Gettleman gets transferred from his Africa post to covering the Middle East. And so then he recruited this woman, Anat Schwartz, and Adam Schwartz, Adam Selas, who is her husband's brother's son. And he basically kind of instructed them to go find propaganda. So this is where Anat Schwartz comes in. She is a filmmaker. She's always been tied to Israeli propaganda. So her first film that she was assistant director to was called Waltz with Bashir. And in Israel, they have this genre of film called shooting and crying. So this film was about these veterans of the Sabra and Shatila massacre that feel guilty about killing some dogs and not the thousands of Palestinians that they actually killed. And she directed that, and it was met with scorn even among Israeli newspapers about how it just reinforces the shooting and crying doctrine. And then later, she went on to make another propaganda film. This one is about French Jews who are moving to Israel and to settler land. And so, then she literally then worked for Israeli state broadcast media. So her first work is fiction, another documentary. Then she continued on with more fiction. So this movie, another fiction movie is called 39, where this woman is 39 years old and her boyfriend doesn't like her and so on. And then she works for Israeli state propaganda. Her entire career has been to push the Israeli state narrative, work on the propaganda. And she had written 0 articles, done 0 journalism before then. And she was given this gig to write for New York Times in a frontline article. And this is where it gets more disturbing. So in an interview with Israeli state media, state television, Channel 14 radio, she basically explains how she called so in the beginning, when she was trying to fish for the story, she called every hospital. And they said, no, we don't have any sexual assaults on case. No, we don't. No, we don't. So she literally went to 14 hospitals looking for an agenda. So this is not what journalists do. Journalists go and write about what they see as truth, not look for an agenda and then retrofit facts to that. So after that was failed, she got this paramedic who worked for the Israeli Air Force to basically say that he saw one woman who was a rape victim that he couldn't really identify. And then she started to go on a wild goose chase from there. This is where things get very disturbing. So the first thing is that around October 7th, this Israeli journalist wrote that we need to turn Gaza into a slaughterhouse. She liked that tweet. And then there's another tweet where this other journalist says, our job is to push the narrative that Hamas is ISIS. She also liked that tweet. So she believes that it's clear that she believes her job is to push the narrative that Hamas is ISIS, which they are not. You can call them many things, but they're different than ISIS. So we know she has an agenda. And so then when she finds this photographer, the way she gets her to go on the record is literally saying, this is going to help Israeli advocacy. You can translate it many ways. Some people have translated as help Israeli Haspara, and other people have translated as help Israeli advocacy. So she literally solicited witnesses to say, hey, I am helping Israeli advocacy. I am not a neutral party. And so this is how and this is written in an Israeli publication. Like, Israelis know about this, Americans don't. And then she comes out with her Screams Without Words article. It has basically the case of the woman whose family denies anything happened. Not anything, who denies that she was raped, where the hospitals haven't found evidence of any rape for her, like actual forensic experts and medical experts. And then she quotes this paramedic who is tied to the Israeli Air Force, who has an agenda. And then she quotes this witness. but he's not just any witness. He is works for Israeli intelligence. He was also mercenary in Congo. Um, so so you can quote these witnesses. Not everyone's not perfect, but you need to give them the context. You need to say, hey, this guy Raz was a mercenary in Congo, and he works for the Israeli intelligence services doing XYZ, and then go on to reveal what he says. She didn't do that. So basically it started to unravel when there's literally no cases, no bodies, no evidence, and Israeli police have admitted they haven't collected evidence. And so so not only did they accuse Hamas of mass rape, they accused them of a specific crime of using rape as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
So that those are two different things. Let's say there's a country and a soldier happens to rape somebody. That's not using rape as a weapon of the war if the country pulls him back from the battlefield and sends him to jail, or has some sort of procedure to send him to jail. That's rape. Rape as a weapon of war is when the superiors order the soldiers to commit mass rape during wartime as a way to terrorize the population. So she went without any evidence. She made this really strong claim, which got picked up by every other parroting Western media, including CNN, Fox, whatever you want. And then, so the New York Times then tried to make a podcast about that article, and other journalists noticed so many holes in the story, and so they withdrew the podcast, but the article is still up. And so, but then if you look at Palestinian journalists, they have been basically fired or not hired for much less. This guy basically tweeted out something like something about like a memorial for Palestine once. He was a photographer and he got fired. This lady, another lady I spoke to, was Palestinian. And when she interviewed with New York Times, they asked her to write a hit piece about herself. And then she asked everyone else, did they make you do that? And they're like, no. And then another guy complained about how in New York Times, he was like, he was, I'm not sure if he was Palestinian, but he was definitely Arab. He was filling out an application on his first day. And then the HR lady had to leave. And so he said, oh, I could finish the application and leave it in your desk. And she asked him, how am I supposed to know you're not going to leave a bomb there? And this is the HR lady. So who do you go to when the HR violates your employment rights against discrimination?
That's insane.
Yeah. So you see this clear double standard. And then after all this hubla, finally New York Times had to investigate Anat Schwartz. And basically she said, I accidentally liked these bunch of tweets that call for genocide. And then, okay, we see no wrongdoing. She does excellent work. We stand by it. And they doubled down on it, which kind of proves that they were never in for the neutral news, but they've always had an agenda that lines with the U.S. national security state that they always push.
Well, the thing about with Israel that I've noticed, and I also too love atrocity fabrication, and the thing that I'm
horrified by it, and I don't like that there's so much war. So that's
why
I
don't like that it exists, but I love to kind of unravel it.
Oh, okay.
I don't love the fact that it happens, but yeah. So what I notice is that they construct a sort of meta narrative, and that's the most important thing for them to do in the beginning of an event or at the commencement of something, and they construct a meta narrative, and then every story can kind of be put up to that meta narrative. So either like Russians are inherently evil, so then every single piece of news after that is held up against the meta narrative of Russia being inherently evil, and so those stories become easier to believe. But I feel like Israel has not been able to construct an appropriate meta narrative during this war, because every story to me, and I also kind of live in my own bubble, but every story to me falls quite flat. It's not like Ukraine, where Ukraine was like, this is believable, we got to go string it, we got to pull it out, we got to figure it out. With Israel, you're like, I'm not even going to bother. Like, if there's people that believe this, they cannot be saved. What what do you think happened to Israeli propaganda? Are they just completely out of touch with the world in general? Are they just they don't care and they're just arrogant and they're like, we'll put out whatever we want and you'll eat it and you'll like it? Or like how did it get so far off track?
Well, you have to remember who they're playing to. They don't care what you think or I think. They have a very strong base among American Christians. So the biggest Israel lobby is Christians United for Israel. They have a very checkered past with anti-Semitism. Their founder said God sent Hitler,
Yeah.
something like that. So
God sent Hitler here. God sent Hitler to help us create Israel. I think that's
something like that. Like something totally insane. Yeah. And then he also officiated at Meghan McCain's wedding, FYI. So these people don't really care about the truth because for them it has to do with some kind of thing related to Armageddon and Israel and Babylon and whatnot. And so that's so they already have all these like lobbying groups that can spend hundreds of millions in elections and stuff like that. So they don't need to get manufacturer consent because they've already established the structures that kind of make them impervious. And unfortunately, with Israeli society, the propaganda has gone very deep. And so many people believe in the dehumanization narrative. So, for example, if you go to Israel, I would suggest not to do this. It's really horrible. But if you go to Israeli Telegram channels, they actually see the same atrocities you see. Like they'll see a starving baby in Palestine, but then they'll be like, oh my God, he was a future terrorist. Good thing you got rid of them. Actually, a Knesset member once said that all Palestinians are snakes, like even in their mother's belly, and we should kill them all. So that's the thing, is that they see the same images and they get a different reaction than we do. And so we are all horrified by starving babies, or I just can't handle a lot of these atrocity pictures anymore because they're extreme and intense. And yeah, so it has to do with a lot of how much dehumanization has worked within Israeli society, and also within, so there is like within like for example, today I read about this professor, and all he did was put up pictures and videos of what's really going on in Gaza, and he got arrested and charged with treason in Israel.
I mean, that's happening in Ukraine as well. I mean,
Ukraine is okay. Ukraine is different. Let's talk. That's a very deep. I have lots to say. It's very deep.
We'll stick to Israel. Maybe we'll have another episode on Ukraine.
But no, I can do Ukraine and Russia, but we're gonna just probably start from like 1600.
Oh my God!
I'm gonna have to do the
Putin interview. It's like the Putin.
I'm gonna have to do what Putin did with Tucker. It's like, well, starting
with roots. I was like, wait, what? Why are we starting there? That was so amazing. But yeah, it's really interesting because Hezbollah, now a lot more Westerners are getting exposed to the Hezbollah. Like they're seeing just how outlandish it really is. And you're so right. They don't care about you or me or the.
No, literally, if you go to it's the same videos that you see from normal Telegram channels that are trying to expose stop genocide. Like if you go to like End Genocide Telegram channel, they're going to show the same videos as the Israel Telegram channel. It's just that the members have different reactions. Like one member's like, let's sign a petition, let's go protest. And in a lot of these channels, they're just like, oh, the baby deserved it.
Yeah, or like I actually saw one Israeli channel that was like, guys, we really need to do something. 80 aid trucks got through today, and that is way too many. And so they're like organizing protests at the border to prevent more aid trucks from.
No, they're not protesting, they're actually blockading.
Like jumping on the trucks, laying in the road.
Yeah, with the weapons and things like that.
Yeah, they're crazy. Well, they were all given, if they didn't have guns, I know they were given weapons at the beginning of this. So now we have this Ouroboros of kind of this rape hoax still kind of going around, and there's like a whole there was a whole like you don't believe all women sort of thing. No one's like, no, I don't believe Israelis, but whatever. So we
Well,
saw
no, it's not about believing women. It's about whether okay, so it is about what internet like Israel can also go to the ICJ and say, "Hey, these fighters did XYZ. Here is the evidence. We want an order to extradite them so we can try and charge them." They did not do that. They just went
right,
and go.
which is obviously fully within their right. They could have Alan Dershowitz do it right now. They could have him file at the ICJ.
Yeah, they can go like there's many ways to get people who committed atrocities to justice that don't include targeting a population that has more than 50% children.
So I want to talk about why debunking this atrocity propaganda is so important. And I want to use Yugoslavia for an example because that was the information war that 100% was won by the West through their PR firms and through their monopoly on media. But I think that we're getting to the point where that sort of atrocity fabrication doesn't really work that well, or these narratives are sort of falling apart. So, but we are still fighting the atrocity propaganda from Yugoslavia. And I know how much you love Yugoslavia. So don't do the typical thing that everybody does with Yugoslavia and take me back to like 1912. Let's just start with after World War II. And I know you love Tito, so maybe a little background on Tito, but I want to talk about the
Tito, okay, so Yugoslavia was one of the few countries that liberated itself with the partisans. Like they didn't need the Soviets, they didn't need America. Thank God they didn't have America or Britain. Or anyone. They actually literally were like a group of peasants or a group of like random people who were just saw the horrors of all the fascism going on, and they liberated themselves. They were the partisans, and Tito was a partisan who basically helped, who liberated Yugoslavia, and then they decide. Okay, so can I actually go back to a little bit further back to 1918?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so before 1918, there wasn't Yugoslavia. There was Serbia was occupied by the Ottoman Empire. Croatia was occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Slovenia too, and so on. So it was basically like broken up into many parts. But then, right after they saw the Bolsheviks checking out of World War I, as we all know, it was a fight between imperial powers to basically figure out who gets to rob colonies. So like the first thing that happened was that the Bolsheviks were like, "Nope, we aren't doing this. We're gonna have a revolution." And that actually caused many soldiers in Croatian soldiers who were fighting for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, heck, what are we doing? And say goodbye. And then they went back home. And same with Slovenians and same with everyone. And then they went on to form the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which became Yugoslavia. So it was basically what people wanted. And they realized that because the South Slavs were separated, they would always be victims to imperialism. So they realized they had to unite together. And this kingdom of Serbs, Slavs, and Slovenes stayed together until the World War II, where Nazi collaborator Ante Pavlic created the independent state of Croatia. And so Yugoslavia has always been a uniting project that united many languages, many religions, ethnicities, everything. And so the challenge for Yugoslavia after World War II is that you have a big portion of collaborationists. So like there was one part of Yugoslavia that was basically trying to genocide the other half. And now you have a state where you have to get all of them to work together and somehow learn how to live together. And that was the biggest challenge that they had to face. And no one knew how to fix this, what to do. And so that's where Yugoslavia was created. I can't hear you.
So Yugoslavia exists, and then we have the Soviet Union falls apart in the early 1990s, and then obviously the West sets their sights on Yugoslavia because there's no need for Yugoslavia if there's no USSR. We don't need
No. USSR and Yugoslavia were not related. Like
No, I know, but we used Yugoslavia as a buffer. Like Yugoslavia was more of a softer communism that we could be like, okay, and then once
Yugoslavia was often used as a softer communism, but it was just they had different realities that they had to deal with that was so different from the Soviet Union that they just created a different system that worked very well, by the way.
So the United States goes into the Yugoslav wars, and what I want to focus on is the narratives that were created out of that war and how they literally, like, just like you were saying with the Hezbollah, the story creates the actual news piece creates the narrative. It's not the story creating the news piece. They're just kind of weaving these stories and then trying to see if they could go find evidence or anything that kind of supports this after the fact. So we had our own mass rape stories in Yugoslavia. So
yeah. I mean, there's thousands of it, but let me I'm just getting out my notes, so give me just 1 minute. Okay, and if anyone wants to feel patriotic about a land that they've never been to, and you have to watch Michael Parenti's "To Kill a Nation" speech.
To Kill a Nation, yep.
I cry each time. Okay, so there's a lot of for me, I think the Kosovo. Well, we can talk about. Okay, so basically, we know that the reason they want to get rid of Yugoslavia is not because Yugoslavia is not a victim to we're working. It's independent. It was, by the way, just so you know, Yugoslavia was one of the few countries that did not recognize Israel in 1948.
Mm-hmm.
They said there should be a one-state solution.
Yep. I think that's really important.
Yugoslavia, India, and some other country, I can't remember. But then no, India didn't exist around that time yet. We're still under the British. So it's Yugoslavia, and it doesn't matter. We'll look at it. And so, yeah. So they also started. The most important thing was that Yugoslavia started this thing called a non-alignment movement, where it was like a bulwark of all the third world countries against imperialism. So it's the first idea of multipolarity.
So, Kosovo. Well, do you want to talk about the actual Yugoslav war? Or do you just want to talk about?
Yeah. Okay. Now I've gotten my notes, so I just sent it to you on Twitter. Okay. So the first thing that they tried. Okay. So the West wanted to basically divide Yugoslavia, but people's ethnicity wasn't that clearly defined by borders. So like there wasn't an area that you could just say, hey, this is going to be Croatia. Hey, this is going to be Serbia. This is going to be Bosnia or whatever, because it was it had happened through centuries of travel and trade, that there was it was like a splatter paint, not something you could actually easily balkanize. So what started to happen is that the first state to split was Slovenia, because Congress actually passed in 1989 like the Yugoslavian Splitting Act. Basically, they said that if a state independently applies for credit, not as part of Yugoslavia, we'll totally recognize it and give them money. And so it was like an incentive for a struggling economy. I know the act is not really called Yugoslavia Splitting Act, but I remember it as Yugoslavia Splitting Act. And so, and then with Croatia, something really weird happened. Basically, there was the Yugoslavian army, And sometime in 1987, there was these like far right people that just like went and jumped on like these far right as in Ustazi people, the people who jumped on these like tanks and like slit the throat of these Yugoslavian army people. And then soon, of course, the West had saved a lot of Ustazi exiles like everywhere. Santa Cruz, Bolivia, California, Canada, Australia, who had committed a lot of terrorists. But then it seemed like they were somehow able to send these like far right paramilitaries back to Croatia.
Yeah.
And so like at that time they started enacting violence towards people who they didn't consider Croatians. So that kind of created like a jump off point. So then but Croatia was kind of there was a big Catholic population who spoke the Croat language in some kind of border, but they also had a small minority of Serbian Croats, and but it was not like Bosnia. Bosnia, on the other hand, had one, like no matter how you try to draw it, like only 1/3 of the population were Bosnian Muslims. They had a big Bosnian Serb population. And then they had a humongous Bosnian Croat population. And so you could not really kind of divide it like you could with Croatia. So then what you have to remember is that the president of the handpicked U.S. president, Igebetovic, I can't pronounce his name, literally was a soldier in the Waffen SS Hanchur division. And he and if you know anything about the Ustazi, like their plan was to commit genocide against Serbs, and they had this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 plan.
1/3, yeah.
1/3 of the Serbs get expelled, 1/3 get murdered, and 1/3 is get forcibly converted to Catholicism and turned into Croats, basically.
I think that's something that people don't realize in the Balkans is that Croats are kind of Catholic Serbs. I mean, there is a Croat nation, but
I wouldn't call it Catholic Serbs. They're Catholic because of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and their language was very similar to Serbian because of the amount of occupation with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Is a little different, is what I'm saying.
But I'm using that to kind of stress the fact that Bosnian and Bosniak were inventions of an upper class to kind of subjugate the Serbs, and then that sort of nationality was utilized to kind of separate them and create this idea of a Bosnian state, which is
except they could not create a Bosnian state because no matter how you cut it, they could not create like a more than 1/3 population.
Yeah, they just can't cut it the right way to include the people that need to be concluded. That's why it should have just been left alone. So the first war, we got to like paint this really awful narrative about the Serbs. And
no, hold on. Okay. Let me continue. Let me give the context, and then you can give the narrative. So now, basically, the West is talking about encircling the Bosnian Serbs with a population of Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats who just 40 years earlier ran like such disgusting concentration camps that actually it disgusted Nazi Germans. Like they're like, oh my God, they're ruining the good name of Nazi Germans and so on. So these are the people that people were asking Bosnian Serbs to live under. And they panicked, and then they started forming their militias. And so they were like, no, we don't. If you can like kind of draw your borders, whatever we want to be part of Serbia. And so that's where the atrocity propaganda began during the Bosnian War. Unfortunately, there was a lot of instances of ethnic cleansing on all three sides. No one's innocent here. But the propaganda was exclusively directed against Bosnian Serbs. So, for example, Bosnia used a lot of Al-Qaeda members and Mujahideen people from God everywhere.
Yep.
And the Croatian militias used all the Ustazi exiles from everywhere too.
Yep.
So like I said, there was no innocent. So there was ethnic cleansing on all sides, but it's not the same as I know it sounds horrible. There is a difference between acts of ethnic cleansing by militia and genocide by a state.
Yes, 100%. And so that meta narrative was completely built. I think it was in 2 decades after the fact is when or maybe even a decade is when the reporters came out and from the WAPO started admitting that they had lied because they were told to lie in order to manufacture consent to bomb the Serbs during the Bosnian War. And then it kind of carried over into the Kosovo War, which is I actually just finished a book about that. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so there's Serbians in Serbia, and there were Bosnian Serb militias. So the oft-repeated accusation is that Serbians in Serbia directed the Bosnian Serbs to militias to commit all their acts. But there have unfortunately, they haven't been able, the ICJ, they even made up a fake international court for Yugoslavia, and they haven't been able to actually convict a single person belonging to the Serbian government, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then they built a lot of atrocity propagandas, which I can try to, okay. So the first thing is Serbs and Croats, so this is like actual what happened. Serbs and Croats mount joint attack on Muslim town. That happened. Bosnian Croats admit inhumane conditions like in camps. Yep. Croats keep food convoys from Muslims half of a city. Arson and death plague the Serbian region of Croatia. Croats holding 240 Serbs in a Bosnia village. Serbs say Muslim, Slav, and Croatian gunmen killed civilians in 6 villages. Bosnians disband Sarajevo Croats. And then there's one where it says Croats and Serbs gang up against Muslims. That happened. Croatia's army launches attacks on Serb-held land. Croat-Serb battle intensifies. So what you see is that in the Bosnian area, all the militias are kind of fighting, but they've manufactured a good guy that doesn't exist within this war, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does exist. It does make sense. Yes. And that's actually the best answer for all of it. It's just everybody was bad in this war, but let's keep going because I love Yugoslavia as well.
Okay. So then basically, eventually, so in 1992, there was an agreement where it's like you have a Bosnian government where you have to kind of give like autonomy to the Serb region, Croatian region, Bosnian region. And after 3 years of all these deaths, murders, and so on, what you get is the same thing that was proposed in 1992, back in 1995. And so for America, this is not a victory because, for example, because they have to have they have representation, autonomous representation for Bosnian Serbs, and it's called Srpska Republic and Bosnian Croats. They can never actually get things like they wanted Bosnia to be a NATO member, but the Bosnian Serbs always stop that, and so on. And so so after these agreements, there was Yugoslavia, which is Serbia and Montenegro, and Kosovo. And so what the West was hoping is that the broken up Yugoslavia were going to basically sign on to all the IMF shock doctrine conditions and let the West have a free-for-all and exploit them. And that's not what happened. So now they had to create another atrocity propaganda on behalf of Kosovo. But anyone, you can go through. If you're looking at it, Serbia from the American context, a lot of this might sound insane and like a conspiracy theory. But if you actually carefully pore over the data, all of this is true. So in the early 1900s, the area, so Kosovo is special for Serbs because it's their holy land. It's kind of like Mecca for Muslims. So that's the first thing we have to understand. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I don't want to lecture, but I'm lecturing. So in their religion, it takes on a special. It's like Jerusalem for Jews, the Vatican, or for Christians, there's a lot of holy sites. But for Serbian, in the Serbian Orthodox Church, Kosovo has a very special religious meaning to it. And yes, like in the early 1900s, that area, Kosovo, literally had a majority of Serbians. But then around World War II, there was some forcible relocation, and that changed. And so then you had a majority of Albanians in that region. And so the West tried to make up that there was Serbians were trying to commit genocide against Kosovo. But literally, if you look at any, let me just bring out my, okay. So here's a New York Times article from 1980. The migration of Serbs is no ordinary problem because Kosovo is the heartland of Serbian history, culture, and religion. Serbs have been in this is before the war, by the way. And then what you see is that so they're talking about alleged genocide of Albanian Muslims. But then here you see that an exodus of Serbs was caused by a murder of a Serb by an Albanian. Exodus of this is from July 12, 1982. Exodus of Serbians stir province in Yugoslavia. So basically, if you have Serbs that are leaving the province and the Albanian population keeps growing in proportion, it is definitely not genocide. But what was the problem was that Kosovo was underdeveloped compared to the rest of Yugoslavia. And that was something that they should have fixed, which they didn't. And so there were many Albanians who had many actual grievances with Yugoslavia and being part of Serbia because of the underdevelopment of Kosovo. Like, no one denies that. Oh, yeah. Here's another article from 1986, April 28th. In one Yugoslav province, Serbs fear the ethnic Albanians. So during this time, what happened is that there was like this organization called the KLA that started emerging, and they were both. They had one of the worst mixtures of being both the heroin dealers of Europe, being Islamic extremists, kind of like Al-Qaeda, and also engaging in many very shady activities, like everything the mafia does. But this is where they both wanted to get rid of Serbia, like wanted Serbia to break down and accept the IMF shock doctrine and privatization and theft of everything they own, while also allowing for a NATO base in Kosovo. And so they manufactured this problem where they basically said that they were going to bomb Serbia for humanitarian purposes. But obviously, when you're dropping depleted uranium on little children, there's nothing humanitarian about it. They end up destroying TV stations, schools. Even the Chinese embassy was bombed, basically, in Serbia.
Yeah, we're going to bomb you to make you feel better. So I hate to do this, but we have to wrap in a few. But what I want to do is let's just get your closing thoughts on the first Yugoslav war, and then let's schedule another episode specifically for Kosovo War.
Okay, sorry about this.
I really get the comments are great. People absolutely love it.
Okay, I'm not reading the comments.
No, you're fine. People love it because we never get to talk about Yugoslavia because nobody's as well versed. And it's funny because the Slovenian admin just messaged me. It says she knows more about Yugoslavia than most of us.
Oh, that's so cute. Thank you so much.
So, but no, people are really loving it, and there's just so much to unpack if we take it from the lens of atrocity propaganda. So, why don't we get your final thoughts on just the Yugoslav war and today, and then we will get together and schedule Kosovo war and atrocity fabrication for that, because that's a whole nother hour or two or 10 that we could talk about that.
For 100. I mean, we can go on forever. So they manufactured this atrocity propaganda. It went every way. Every hysterical note was hit. But then what happened is that if you then look at things that really happened as opposed to what the Western newspapers, everything was reversed. So in 2004, we started to hear reports about the KLA doing organ trafficking on Serbian prisoners, 100% true. It was actually confirmed by the ICC, or actually, no, they set up, it was like an ICC, some sort of kangaroo court set up by the West just to do trials in Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
But then these KLA leaders were tried and convicted. And they engaged in systematic torture. They engaged in like pushing Serbs out. So it was basically 100% reverse. In fact, there are 2 ex-presidents of Kosovo who are on trial in The Hague right now. And while they haven't been able to get a conviction for a single Serb in Serbia, so basically that's kind of, when you look at what really happened, everything is actually reversed. But another thing is when the US declared Kosovo to be independent, even if you were to ask most Albanians, who do you want to lead? Be part of Serbia, or let's have a gang of heroin dealers and organ traffickers lead us? They're not going to pick the gang of heroin traffickers and or heroin and organ traffickers. So they never had a referendum. The US just declared Kosovo to be a country, and had a backroom committee that made up their constitution and things like that. So we never knew if the majority of the people in Kosovo wanted Kosovo to be their own country.
I think that that's all the time that we have for today.
Well, thank you so much.
No, I loved this. This was such a great learning experience for me. And I've really been trying to discuss Yugoslavia and the Balkanization of it a lot lately, because I think that it's something that we can really learn from, and kind of learn from the mistakes of other countries. And that was such a great, that war in particular, I think, is one of the best examples of atrocity fabrication in order to create the means necessary to have a humanitarian intervention. And that's what, and while I've been watching this war, I have seen a lot of indications that they've kind of floated the idea of humanitarian intervention into Gaza and a demilitarization thing. And I see a lot of patterns in their behavior, as they did with Serbs, that now they're doing with the Palestinians in a way. So I'm glad that we're exploring these topics. I'm so glad that I got you to talk about it, because I don't know that I've met anybody that knows as much as you do on the breakup of Yugoslavia. This is pretty incredible. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I still don't know. I still only know 10% because there's so much to know.
You'll never know all 100%. But yeah. Esha, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, and where you prefer them to go to find you?
I prefer them to go to Historically and then become a paid subscriber.
Yes, we all prefer that you go to all of our subscription services and become a paid subscriber. So please visit.
Yeah. But then after that, you can find me at Esha Legal on Twitter, historic_ly on Twitter. That's not me alone. You can also find us at YouTube on Historically. And tonight we will be doing there's another atrocity propaganda we have to talk about with Haiti, because they're making up crap about cannibal gangs.
Cannibalism. So, yep.
Yeah. So we're going to be on at 7 p.m. Eastern. What time is it for you?
It's 1 p.m. Western. So you have 4 hours.
Okay. And then what time is it in Slovenia?
It's 9 at night.
Okay. So go there. So it can't be 9. It's only 6 hours ahead. 1 a.m.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so so we're gonna actually continue this discussion. And so have a great rest of the evening or morning or afternoon.
Afternoon. I don't know what day it is. Thank you, Esha.
Okay.
We will see you guys soon.
Bye-bye.